keeping warm in all our different spaces where we at. I think we've seen in terms of the weathers how they are looking like from different regions. I hope where you are, you're safe and you're keeping yourself warm in this cold weather. But with that being said, colleagues, thank you very much for joining us to our session, on today's session on our HR or Human Resource Management Masterclass. So today's theme will be about AI-powered HR, from moving away from the automation as how we knew it as, now more on the augmentation of things. Now we are trying to now enhance in terms of, the human resource management function, where it was all about automation, but now it's about increasing beyond automation now in terms of having some, AI assisting us in terms of decision making, in terms of recruitment, reducing all those biasness in terms of talent, and also identifying and assessing some of the needs, that are needed from the talent that we have in different organizations. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us. How the session today will be unpacked. Our session will start from me introducing our guest speakers, our very esteemed guest speakers. And then from there, we have three sections in terms of our panel discussion, which one will be looking at evaluation of AI in terms of human resources. We will be looking at some of the benefits and some of the risks of automation in terms of the HR processes, as it were. And then we'll move in terms of now where we look at some of the cases, that might be applicable in relation to recruitment, talent management, employee engagement, as well as performance management. And then lastly, we look at the augmentation now of human resource professional, where we'll be looking at some of the skills that the HR professionals then need for the future. And then we'll then allow now for the Q&A session, where we'll allow for our participants to be able to share their thoughts, to be able to share their questions, which will then be reflected upon by our esteemed guest speakers. And then in closing, we'll have just the key points in terms of summary of the session and key takeaways and final thoughts from our guest speakers. Thank you very much, colleagues, once again for joining us. And with us here, we have Dr. Sajana Joshua, who is the Global Human Resource Executive at the First Red. We also have Dr. Akoda Makoboga, who's the Vice President, Global Employment Relations at Makosa. At Makosi. Sorry about that. So thank you very much, our esteemed guest, for joining us for today, taking the time to share your thoughts, to share your perspective, to share a different, fresh perspective in terms of AI in relation to human resource, moving away from automation now to now augmentation now. Thank you very much for that. So colleagues, with that being said, I think what we have said is that AI is now trying to shift beyond just simple automation, and now has moved towards a more collaborative approach, which is called augmentation. This session will then help us to better understand in terms of the augmentation of HR and how it can enhance the capabilities of human resource function through AI-driven insights, as well as decisions, assisting in terms of decision support. We are going to reflect on some of the benefits of automation, such as your chatbots for employee queries, where employees will be querying something instead of sending an email to HR, but there could be a chatbot that has already those frequently asked questions, that can be answered very quickly, instantly, whether through WhatsApp or whether through the website and so forth. We're going to be reflecting on the AI powered resume or CV screening tools that might be there, in terms of HR selection and recruitment processes. We'll also be reflecting on the automated job posting systems that may be there, that we can be looking at or reflecting on in terms of the future. We're also going to be reflecting on the use of your machine learnings when it comes to eliminating your biasness in terms of hiring, as well as AI-powered tools in terms of performance management. How are we moving away from performance management only being done between, the line manager as well as the team member or the employee. So thank you very much for joining us, esteemed panel guest members, as well as our participants. Moving on to our first section, we'll be looking at now the evolution of how it has evolved in terms of AI in Asia, in terms of automation, and some of the benefits as well as the risk. So how are we going to be having this session? We're going to be opening it up to our guest speakers in terms of they will be able to share their thoughts wherever they are feeling comfortable in terms of sharing their own perspectives from each question that I will be laying out. So I think as our first question, I want to ask in terms of, how has the role of AI evolved in terms of HR over the past 5 to 10 years? Anyone from our guest speakers would want to then share their thoughts in terms of that question?
I'm happy to come through. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. Look, I think that AI in HR has grown in leaps and bounds, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years. I think there was also the big catalyst in terms of the pandemic, which also forced organizations, even those that were hesitant to kind of explore that type of technology, they had no choice to do it. So I think that's why I think also there was this period of 5 to 10 years in terms of what we've seen in terms of acceleration. I think that was one of the key catalysts. So it's grown in leaps and bounds. If I think back to a time where there was a lot of outsourcing many years ago that was happening in HR, and the theme was around simplification, right? And I think there's still that theme that carries through in terms of AI and HR, but there's a shift now. So it's similar to what you said, Leander, in terms of we're almost moving from the just pure automation to the augmentation, right? So now we've got the automation, we've got almost the simplification, right? If we take those as foundational points, and now we're starting to say, what value are we getting from it, right? What is the data telling us? What are the analytics telling us, right? And if you look at HR then, end to end in terms of the employee life cycle, from when it is that a vacancy crops up, you can actually even look at it even before the vacancy crops up, because where you've got key data analytics in your organization, you are able to see the key areas where perhaps workload is imbalanced, et cetera. You look at your strategic direction as an organization, and you start to say, we're going to have a gap here. We need a data privacy officer because GDPR and POPI have come online, whatever the case may be. So you've got that element that's able to do the analysis in terms of your workforce. And then you almost identify that there's a key role that needs to come up here, right? And if your AI mechanisms and your tools are quite sophisticated, you might even be able to see at which point you will need an incumbent in the role, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be, right? So you start looking at it from there. Now the question is, how are you going to get Luyanda, who's the best person for the job, in that job? And what is going to happen from an experience perspective for him? And that's when the bit around the talent acquisition then starts to come into play. Where are you going to find him? Are you going to find him on LinkedIn? Is that all your recruiter is going to do, to just look at profiles on LinkedIn? Or are you going to start to leverage technology to start to bring up CVs from all sorts of places, right? Is there perhaps a mechanism where you tracked Luyanda from the last time you'd interviewed him 5 years ago, and you've been tracking his progress because you said, this is a great candidate, and I think he may be ready in 3 years, 4 years, whatever the case may be. So you've got all of these variables. It completely opens up your world completely. If you underpin that potentially with borderless work, remote work, hybrid work, all of a sudden your whole perspective is opened up, because you're not just looking at Johannesburg, Pretoria, South Africa. All of a sudden you've got this beautiful pool of candidates that you can look at. So, and that's why I say when you look at the employee life cycle, insofar as getting the right incumbent in the job, having that seamless experience, do you have a system where you ask someone to upload the CV and then they still have to type everything out, right? Because I can tell you, if that happens to me, I'm going to stop the application. I'm not interested, because So simply don't ask me to upload it and then just type it all out again. That's about candidate experience, right? You could lose a key candidate just from that experience. What are you going to do in terms of an interview process? You're doing virtually, you're going to do it virtually. Is there going to be a warm body in a seat of an Akona that's speaking to a Luyanda? How many phases, etc.? Luyanda then comes into the business. There's an onboarding stage that goes with that. And I'll let Sanjana come in as well. But it's when I talk about the employee life cycle, you're going to bring somebody into the business. They're going to come into the business. It's no longer then around candidate experience, it's around employee experience, right? And you've got the employee life cycle. You've got learning and development that happens. You've got performance management that happens. You've got rewards that happens within that space, up to then including potentially the end of the life cycle where you could exit based on disciplinary measures, poor performance, or you just resign and you're finding a different opportunity. At each and every stage, organizations are now able to leverage the AI capability to ensure that they get data-driven insights, which then allows also for a process of continuous improvement. And my final point on this is really around saying that if you're going to have the AI technology, you're convinced that it's working the way that it should, but you're not getting the insights that are able to help you to say, this is how I need to improve this process from an employee experience perspective, right? I've got people that are asking me for disciplinary code. This is what happens to our HRBPs all the time. Can I take on a second job? It's in the code of conduct. There's a conflict of interest policy, but why should I do that? Because I've got HR. So I'm just going to send an email to HR. I'm going to seize the email 2 days later. You're then complaining that you've got a poor experience because HR is not responsive. That's where things like the chatbots, etc., because it's on-demand resources, that type of stuff can come into play. So yeah, I think that's my contribution, just insofar as how that needle has shifted from where we were and to where we are.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akona. I think you've touched something very fundamental, with COVID. I think it has fast-tracked in terms of the usage now, because discussions were always around automation. But now COVID has said, hey, we are moving away from automation. You should have done that. That's the thing of the past. Everything should have been automated. All those administrative tasks should have already been done. But now let's enhance it beyond that automation, indicating issues such as the employee experience or potential candidate experience, reflecting on if you're seeing a lot of questions on that prompt where you need to fill out, you're already saying, hang on, probably this job is not mine. I think I've seen some posts also on your X as well as your LinkedIn in relation to that, to say, if you're already seeing this, just know that the job is not yours. Probably it then leads to that issues of, experience, for a potential candidate. How can we then enhance that? Look, thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts. And Dr. Sanjana, any thoughts in terms of the evolution of HR from the last 5 to 10 years?
I think first off, good evening, everybody. I hope you're all keeping warm on this cold evening. Just a correction, Luyanda, I'm not a doctor as yet. I've started my PhD. I've done my year one. I still need to finish off my thesis, but yeah, I'm going to follow in Dr. Akona's shoes very soon. But a very interesting. Yes. A very interesting conversation, and very excited to be here this evening with the team. I think Dr. Akona really set a good scene in terms of the evolution of AI and where we find ourselves as the human capital fraternity. I think the view I'll bring tonight is just around the real life application in the corporate space. In the organization I come from, I think a lot of you know the First Gen brand. If you don't know First Gen, you certainly will know RMB and FNB as our subsidiaries. So we've got RMB and FNB, Motorvantage, Westbank that report into the First Gen group. And the large organizations and the banks are definitely talking about AI. And I know we're talking about AI in the context of HR tonight, but I think what's really important to know is when you think about the evolution of how we use information as human beings, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been such an acceleration of how we adopt, let's just say, new technology. If you think about the adoption of the telephone or the television, and you can go and do some research around this, the television took years to get global penetration. And then you think about the advent of the information age and the internet. And yes, it got a lot faster once we got computers and we've got the internet. That penetration was significantly reduced. Now let's think about AI. If we had to reflect on when we really got to know about AI in our own lives, it's probably in the last 2 to 3 years. Doesn't mean that there wasn't obviously work done in the back end from developers around AI. But when we heard ChatGPT, I remember when it broke, people were still trying to make sense of what is ChatGPT? Is this something that's going to die out? And within a few months, it didn't take a long time, ChatGPT became a household word and name. So that just gives you a sense of how quickly AI is starting to become a buzzword, and it's integrated into our everyday language and the way we do things. People may no longer use Google; they will use ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever AI or large language model their organization uses, or what they're au fait with. So I think the first point I'm going to make is that the acceleration is quick. It's not going to slow down. In fact, it's only going to accelerate. Coming back to our world in human capital, again, the thinking is not new. The developers, Microsoft, Workday, all of the partners we work with have thought about the implications of AI for HR. The readiness levels that I'm finding is different across different organizations. And you have to take the practicalities of the African continent and what does it mean for human capital within our context in South Africa, and the use of AI responsibly in our context. We'll talk a little bit about bias later on, but it's interesting that it's not all happening at the same rate, but we're all learning together with our global counterparts. I think that's fantastic, and it's also breaking down boundaries, where if I use the television or the computer and that penetration, that took time, especially in the developing world. What we're finding with the adoption of AI, the boundaries of developed world and non-developed world is actually null and void, which is super exciting. So I think it's fantastic. Definitely COVID accelerated obviously the interest and the use of AI. We realized we don't have to be physically together to work together. And so people's idea of change agility, adopting new technology, not being afraid or fearful of what tech could bring, I do agree with Dr. Akona. COVID has shifted our reality. And so it does leave us actually wide open to possibilities in the HR space. We will talk about some of the considerations when we talk about talent acquisition, the use in performance management. And I think, like I said, a lot of the SMEs are now starting to think about, is it quick adoption? But have we thought about this in terms of, are there biases? What we feed into the large language models are critical. But I'm not going to cover everything now. I think I'll stop there for now, Leander. I hope that gives you a perspective on the rapid rate of adoption.
Thank you very much, Sajan. But I'm paying it forward when I say doctor. I think they say, what the mouth says, it builds.
I'll take that.
So when I saw that the PhD has already been started, I'm like, oh, okay. It's already maybe the doctor title is already there. But thank you very much for sharing some of your insights. I think something fresh that I've picked up, it's in relation to television adoption. When I think back and I also read back in terms of how it took time in terms of that adoption, versus now with the AI coming through, with all these languages, think we were very much quicker if we're to compare and refer it in terms of the adoption of television at that time where it is right now with your AIs and so forth. Probably it's because maybe it does use the integration of smartphones, it leverages on the smartphones, which are already there, which people already been exposed to things already, computers and so forth. So it was not a different thing because, these languages, they just bring information together at once. We used to use Google already. I think probably maybe it could be the contribution that we managed to adopt to it very much quicker, as opposed to how television was then done. I think you reflected something in relation to African context. In my argument, sometimes I want to say we are being forced in the fourth industrial revolution, but we are still stuck maybe in the second or in the third from an African perspective. And then how do we blend now where we are still stuck with the second and the third with the fourth one? Because I don't think we have fully blown out in the third, industrial revolution, as it were, as we are finding ourselves now within the fourth, and we might move now to the fifth one. I don't know when. But I think maybe you've touched something in terms of that adoption that it might vary based on the regions, us being from an African context. And it might also vary from different companies, as it were, where they are, is it small, is it big, and, in terms of also its flexibility, and it's a way of ease of wanting to adapt to things. But thank you very much for touching on that. So I think my follow-up then question, my esteemed guest, I want to ask in terms of what are some of the HR functions that have seen that great impact, when it comes to AI? What are some of the HR functions that you feel from your own perspective have been very much implicated or very much been affected or influenced by AI from an HR functions? Any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to start. And I'll also give my personal experience at the bank around where I'm seeing the most impact immediately. Certainly in the space of our HCM fundamentals. So we call it HCM fundamentals. If you think about your master data and how we use master data in organizations, where you needed a very strong shared services arm in order to have accurate data. Now AI is actually able to fix master data, detect inaccuracies. When you think about HC core, you think about as basic as job descriptions. Previously, if you go back, if we had to rewind, in the space of organizational effectiveness and organizational design, a job profile would take a while. You'd need to set up time with your manager, understand what does this job entail, select from a list of competencies, decide on education. Now, all you've got to do is at the click of a button, go to your AI tool and say, I want a job description created for a head of talent. And yes, you'll get something automatically. You may have to enhance, obviously, a few things from a contextual perspective, but you could actually say, here's what F&B needs. Give me the best job description for this context. And it's fantastic. So I think the whole area of job design, org design, job architecture is fundamentally going to be disrupted. Definitely talent acquisition. I think Dr. Okona highlighted this point. If you think about the time recruiters used to spend sifting CVs, matching skills to job requirements, scheduling interviews, getting the panel booked, recording interview notes, making recommendations, all of that entire value chain of recruitment will be automated. And what does it now mean for the person that is in the recruiter seat? Does it mean their job becomes obsolete? And this is quite an interesting discussion when we're talking about augmentation, because if organizations are really thinking about the reskilling agenda, it becomes less about obsolete skills and more about how can we really partner strategically with business. So instead of HR being the back office, note takers, administrative arm, we're now the strategic partners to business, sitting side by side with them. So the use of our time shifts. And we're seeing that significantly in the recruitment space. Am I saying that operating models won't shift and change? No. In fact, I do think operating models will shift and change, but it's not all negative. I think that our use of time as human beings are going to become a lot more enhanced. What I'm seeing currently is in the performance management space as well, how to write effective goals. You know, before we used to run master classes and workshops on helping line managers apply the SMART methodology, what's specific and measurable. Now, a line manager just has to say, this is my idea of the goal. Help me make it smart. Help me create metrics and measures for this goal. And so yes, it's performance management, but the other element I'm highlighting is line manager enablement. The learning space is fundamentally going to be disruptive. That people can learn in the flow of work. They can use AI to help accelerate the learning agenda. So I'm seeing it touch every single part of HR. There's some more than others. Some are more low-hanging fruit. The more strategic spaces, such as perhaps reward, the reward sort of transactional elements can be automated. But when we talk about reward consulting, board management, REMCO management, of course, you know, you'll need a lot more, that you need obviously the right human beings to intervene and engage. Strategic talent management as well. Yes, you can maybe do talent plans and AI can support you with that, but not the talent conversation. And so, yeah, I think it's, I would say it's touching every single space of this value chain, but to different degrees at this stage.
Thank you very much, Sanjan. I think you've touched very well in terms of some of the benefits, you know, that AI then comes with from different functions. You've talked about issues related to job design, you know, that now you can get it from a spot. You no longer need to sit with a panel of different line managers, sit down and say, colleagues, we are looking for a talent manager, you know, a talent lead. Let's sit down. What does it entail? What does the job? How would it look like? But now from AI, it can at least extract some of those things from different, tools and from different spaces that those inputs are coming from, for you to be able to then reflect on it and then see that is it the best one for our organization. Thank you very much for touching on some of those benefits and touching some of the areas and functions of HR that have been greatly impacted by the AI. You know, you've talked about performance management, that now you're moving away from sitting down, you know, putting a smart framework and trading about the smart framework, but now it's about an argument of saying, here's my goal, you know, help me be able now to be able to measure it properly with all my, employees or subordinates and so forth. Thank you very much for sharing that, Sanjay. I truly appreciate it. Dr. Akona, any perspective from your side?
Yeah, sure. So I think in starting to share my perspective, just thinking about one of the last points that was raised, which is that HR is no longer back office. This is about HR being a strategic partner, right? And having a seat at the table. And to show that this is not just a possibility, but something that we should really expand upon. If you look over the past couple of years as well, how many CHROs are actually becoming CEOs? 15 years ago, there was less of that happening. The expectation was always that it's the person that's an operations director, an operations whatever, that is going to step into the CEO role. But that is starting to change, right? And that tells you around the shift that's starting to happen. And when we leverage elements like AI, you know, it gives us even more of that impetus. So just around that element in terms of playing that strategic role, I think what I can touch on is my area of passion and my area of expertise insofar as the employee relations space. And I think one of the things that we often get wrong is when we think employee relations, we think CCMA, we think labor court, we think strikes, right? And whilst all of those things can be true under the employee relations portfolio, the shift that needs to start to happen when we start to become strategic partners, is an understanding that your employee relations climate is going to affect your organizational culture. There's a clear linearity between the two, right? Now, when you start to think like elements like what I'd mentioned before in terms of borderless work, right? You'd also mentioned elements in terms of, we also at different places, right? As organizations, as countries within Africa, but notwithstanding all of these differences, what's happening is that the competition is getting tougher. There is no employer in my mind that can be comfortable and secure that they will continue to make whatever profit margins that they have been making the past 10 years into the future, right? Smaller boutique organizations that are popping up all over the place. So the competition is tough, not just for talent, but around gaining a competitive advantage as an organization. Now, when we think about some of the points that have been mentioned in terms of the acceleration of the adoption of technology, it really does mean that potentially you're a big corporate with a workforce of 10,000 and you could be competing with an organization with a workforce of 100 people, because the gap insofar as access to technology has gotten smaller. Now, my question then to you is, if that gap has become smaller, what is going to give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace as an organization? It's going to come down to your people, right? And if your culture in the organization is compromised, you're simply not going to get that competitive advantage, right? Insofar as being able to leverage that through your people. So when I talk about employee relations, I'm not talking necessarily about the litigation and that side of things, right? Even though it obviously touches on that. You think about something as simple as policies, right? As an HR person, you'll ask yourself, are you still doing that round robin on email when there needs to be a policy update? Oh no, this case came out at the CCMA, at the Labour Court, etc. Oh no, these are the amendments insofar as the Employment Equity Act. Then Akwana needs to phone this person and then send an email to that person. Then, yes, we need to do a policy update. Then the policy update is done. Then there's a whole round robin until somebody eventually signs off the policy update. Surely not. Surely not. That's not the best use of our time. You're able to leverage AI for these types of things, right? How many of us are still struggling with version control? Which one came first, right? Is it policy 201 or 102 that came first, right? Is it dated? Is it not, right? What prompted the change? Because the other thing that we don't think about where we can leverage AI is in terms of institutional knowledge. People come and go in an organization, right? But if every time somebody's leaving an organization, they leave with all of that institutional knowledge and that capital in their minds, the organization is going to struggle to move forward, right? So when you look at things like just as simple as policy updates or creation of policies, etc., you can look to AI to automate, right? Automate that. So from an updating perspective, from a distribution of policies with that ER oversight, you're reducing the admin, you are speeding up the amount of time for you to go live, and potentially you're enhancing your compliance with whatever legal standards you may need to be looking at that particular point in time, right? So it's around those core efficiencies. And then when we think about policies, right, one of the things that comes to mind is compliance, right? So you're an organization potentially that is operating in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Are you doing searches on Google in terms of what the legal developments are in a particular geography, right? Because if that's what you're doing, you're going to come up short, right? Are you doing risk assessments? Because sometimes this happens, right? So businesses may be saying, we've expanded into Namibia, we want to go into Botswana. Strategically, we believe that we've got a base, et cetera, and this is where we see our growth kind of sitting. So are you still doing your risk assessments on an Excel spreadsheet? Surely not. Well, one would hope not, because we all know what happens in terms of data integrity. Akwana's laptop, oh, my laptop crashed, it's gone, and all sorts of, it's just incredibly inefficient, right? So when you start to leverage AI for those things, and now I'm getting into the practical elements and the nub insofar as the value that we can really garner from AI, what that will serve to do is leveraging the AI will be able to help you to ensure your labor compliance and to ensure that whatever risk assessments, etc., that they are incredibly comprehensive. And
we might have lost Dr. Kono. Sanjana, am I there, or is my network?
Yes, I think we've lost her.
Okay. No, I think she was touching very
on the technology that you actually leverage. You can, right? This is critically important because who's got the time to be continuously kind of doing that? Again, it's around the best use of our time. So you prevent violations, you reduce your legal risk, and that's one of the ways in which that can become quite useful. And the last point I'll make, just around the ER space is just that analytics piece, which is so important, that we often don't get right? And when I talk about that culture piece as well, many years ago, when we even looked at the performance of individuals and who were esteemed individuals in the organization, it was around who are the individuals that are getting the results. Right. If you're looking at it from a sales perspective, who are the individuals that are getting that right? If it's around strategy, who are the individuals that are getting that right? It didn't matter. The how didn't matter, right? What was looked at was the results. But of course, if the how is not factored in, it can erode the culture of the organization, because you can have a leader who is exceptional at what they do, but they're actually toxic as a leader, right? Now, it took a very long time for that to kind of come right, in organizations kind of doing the training and the everything else in as far as that's concerned. But one of the questions that I would have is, as an HR professional at any given point in time, right? Are you still caught by surprise when eventually Akona speaks up and says, it's been 4 years that we've been subjected to this poor treatment by this leader. This is why so-and-so left. This is what happened, etc., etc. So Akon is now kind of telling the whole story. It comes as a surprise to you because you had no mechanism whatsoever that was giving you any type of analytics insofar as the people that are leaving, why they are leaving, whether you're leveraging exit interviews, etc. Are you able to understand which managers got the highest turnover in your organization, right? If you are able to understand that, do you know why, right? Is it just because it's a tough part of the business? Or is it, coming down to manager behaviors, right? If it's manager behaviors, you can still leverage the analytics that you're getting from the AI to be able to suggest training interventions for that particular individual, right? Before it escalates to a point where it's now a grievance and people need to be taken into disciplinary hearings, etc., etc. You need to look at your workforce data. You need to look at your trends. If those are things that you can't identify, it means you will always be caught by surprise insofar as things that are actually eroding the culture of your organization, right? And so this is critically important. And we know what happens in terms of social media, right? You're the last one to find out. The rest of us are going to know before you that there's a problem in your organization, right? And then there's all sorts of risks that burgeon from there. So I think those are the kind of overarching three, views that I can share, particularly from an employee relations and a compliance perspective.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Kono. We did lose you for just a few seconds there and there. It was just network issues. And then when we were about to then take over, you then jumping in. And I don't think we lost so much in terms of your valuable contributions. It was just that few seconds, one sentence that we lost you, then you just came back in, But thank you very much. I think, from Ms. Sanjana and coming to you, Dr. Kono, you've touched on something very fundamental in terms of now HR playing that strategic role. No longer HR just sitting there being an administrator, just doing that administrative work in terms of, okay, employers are not performing, how do we then assist them? But now you're sitting at that strategic board, and you've mentioned something related to CEOs in the past 10, 15 years. They used to be, taken from operating officer, from an head of operations, or maybe from the chief finance, officer. But now HR, since it is that strategic, discussion now element in terms of HR. Now they have that seat at the board now to have those conversations at that particular level. Thank you very much for touching on that. We've also touched on some of the benefits, related to policy updates, where you used to sending emails, losing track of some policies, to say what version are we at. But now AI repositories are assisting us in terms of that, where now you could be collaborating instead of sending emails and so forth. This is an update. This is what the legislation now says. There's an update, but you can leverage AI in terms of also those updates and so forth. Thank you very much, very much for sharing some of those thoughts in relation to that. Colleagues, I will be taking you just as a twist, and it's a conversation when it comes to, yes, we are deploying some of these AI tools. We're deploying them, we're using them, we're leveraging them, to our benefit, gain back time to focus on some of the strategic things. But what are some of the risks and implications, as well as ethical concerns, should HR leaders consider when deploying these particular AI tools? Any thoughts in terms of that? Some of the impacts, some of the risks, some of the ethical concerns that we should be looking out, from an HR perspective. Any thoughts? Thought Mr. Jana wanted to unmute. I don't know, wants to go first.
I'm happy to use an example that's actually in the media at this stage. So Workday is a global HC system. I think some of you may have heard about Workday. Compete with the likes of Oracle. If you're familiar with HC systems, and they've introduced a recruiting agent. They call it their recruiter agent that's linked to Hired Score. And what has transpired in the US is that a group of individuals that are over 40 have taken Workday to court to say that they are being discriminated against because the AI agent is not, is auto declining their applications, and they've got evidence of they've applied for more than 100 roles, and how they know it's an AI agent is because they get immediate auto declines. So what they're putting forward legally is that there's discrimination in the use of AI, firstly from a Workday perspective, and secondly, they're also challenging the organizations that now use Workday. So obviously Workday is standing their ground around there's no discrimination that's been built in. They can't be held liable. It's the corporate. Corporates are obviously using the tool. Corporates understand the implications of the use of AI, etc. So it's a good current case for us to follow. I encourage you to go and have a look at that if you Google Workday and the Hired Score recruiter AI legal case in the US. But it brings about a very interesting topic. And I personally think, and I think Dr. Okona is more qualified on the ER front to comment on this, but I really think there's going to be a lot more cases that's going to surface into the future around the use of AI in recruitment. And if you think about our context in South Africa, obviously there could be an argument that says, well, AI is being less biased than a human being. Do human beings have biases? Of course we do. It's part of our makeup as human beings. How those biases obviously will play out in recruitment, in talent decisions, etc. So can AI start to eliminate bias? Sure, it can. It can help us be a lot more non-biased, obviously in terms of the way we screen, because the AI will screen around the black and white, what you need for the role versus what the CV presents. However, it also can AI learn biases through input data? Yes, it can. It's also been shown that biases are learned from an AI perspective based on the large language model algorithms and like I'm saying, the base data. I'm not a technical expert, but that's what the research is telling us as well. So we can't eliminate the fact that we can't say that AI is totally non-biased. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done in this field. And that's why I think responsible use of AI is super important. And as cases like this emerge, this is just obviously one of the very first. There's a lot more. The HR fraternity has to also stand by the way we're using AI, responsible use of AI, and we will need to also have a legal standpoint around this. So that's super critical. If I think about our own internal example, we have Copilot as our tool of choice within FirstRand that's linked to the Microsoft suite. And it's quite a well-known AI tool. But how corporates are using it, we're not using open AI. We're also very careful that if we use open AI, and if I had to feed a document or a policy and ask AI to obviously comment on that, that goes into the open AI system. And then there's risks, right? If you think about financial services, we have risks associated with open AI. So there are internal legal experts and that work together with our data teams to look at what's possible, what's not, what are the policies around the use of AI in the organization, how can employees should use it, what are the restrictions. In fact, Dr. Kona touched on compliance training. Currently, we have the use of AI and social media, and if we use it irresponsibly, we can be held accountable as employees. So that's another element or another field that's also evolving that I'm also watching quite closely around the integration and how that's coming to the fore, and how legal experts are also having to support businesses around the use of AI in our organization, the responsible use of AI. And so, there's a book by Dr. Mark Nasilla that talks about the use of AI in Africa, and how there's been findings around the fact that language, the fact that we have such diversity of language within our continent, and how AI obviously hasn't learned those nuances, and how that could be to our disadvantage in terms of the use of the translation of one language to the other, and the mistranslation. And for example, if you want to translate an English document into another language, how we're not getting that accuracy in the translation. And if you're now using that translation for inferences, how that can be to our disadvantage. So it's a body of work that's starting, and I'm glad I'm actually encouraged by the fact that more research is going into it, but a lot more needs to be done. I don't think we fully understand it as yet.
No, thank you very much, you have touched on the US example case study, and I think it's something that I also need to just go in and explore and read on. And as an academic institution, I think it's an article or a case study that we can maybe leverage on, to ask those questions, Mr. Sajane. Ask those prominent questions in relation to HR. Maybe we can use it as part of the assessment instrument. That case study. I think it's truly a case study which is very new and fresh, and very relevant in terms of the landscape where we currently at. And obviously, of course, I think that biasness also came with as humans. To say 40 plus, likely if you're unemployed already, we're already sidelining you. We're thinking that the lifespan that we'll be having with you as an employee, 20 years, 15 years, it's very short. As opposed to somebody when they're 25, 30s, right close to their 30s, we're thinking that we can leverage on this person for the next 10 years, leverage on their expertise, train them, and so forth. It also makes sense in terms of those biasness, because remember, AI, it's a tool that we feed as human beings. then it makes sense. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanjanya, on that case study, on your contributions. It's truly appreciated. I think I'll take you up on that case study to go read it, check it out, and then maybe see how we can leverage on the case study, use it in terms of some of our assessment instruments. I don't know, Dr. Akona, do you want to also share your thoughts?
Yeah, so, excuse me. So I think just looking at some of the key risks in terms of managing AI in HR, I think it was the Academy to Innovate HR, if memory serves, that almost set this out quite nicely in terms of saying, well, the key risks are almost three kind of broad categories. One, in terms of inherent risks, and your inherent risks sit in the space of the actual AI technology that you've decided to deploy, right? How does it actually work? What are the nuts and the bolts, right? And this is when you start to understand a little bit around, are there elements of bias in terms of the data or in terms of the algorithms that are being used? To what extent does the actual AI technology give autonomy, a level of autonomy and control to the organization, right? Are there any security vulnerabilities, perhaps within the actual technology? And there's a piece also around transparency and explainability, which is really around saying that when you deploy the actual AI technology, there should be absolute transparency in terms of how the technology works, how it is that you're getting to certain results and why, etc., right? Because I think where that element in particular, the waters are murky, this is the element that starts to breed that space insofar as we're surprised because, there's a case of this nature and nobody had picked it up. So that transparency that really, that is critically important. So you're sitting with one basket in terms of your inherent risks. Then you're sitting with a second basket in terms of the risks of application, that is, right? So you can have elements where the technology is absolutely fantastic. You've gotten the algorithms really great. You've trained the data set such that, there's mitigation of bias and the like. But it doesn't take away from the fact that people can misuse the very same technology, right? And the question is, if there is no human oversight, right, and we're just letting the tool run as it's supposed to, right? How do we pick up elements of misuse? Because that might be intentional, but it also might not be intentional. So it might be a bit of a misalignment type of issue, right? How do we close that gap? Because one of the key risks that I've been seeing is almost what has become an over-reliance on that automation, on that AI technology. When you start to have that over-reliance, it means there's very little that's happening from a human oversight perspective, right? So that's kind of the second broad bucket insofar as the application risks. And then obviously the third part is around the compliance risks, right? Are we flirting with data privacy violations, right? Depending on where you are, it could be GDPR, it could be POPI, et cetera, are you flirting with non-compliance from a regulatory perspective? If you're in the financial services space, in particular, et cetera, what does that look like for you insofar as compliance risks, right? And there's a key critical part also in terms of the key risks, which speaks to some of the ethical considerations as well that come with HR. So part of what the case that we were talking about now tells us is that, and I haven't read it, but I would imagine that the complaint is underpinned by a lack of fairness and probably a lack of equal opportunity, right? The door's getting closed to me, and there's no rational basis or substantiation for why that should be the case, right? So from an HR perspective, we need to mitigate that risk, where we need to ensure that the AI applications that we're using, right, in terms of design as well, because those design principles are very important, that they are able to ensure that there are fair outcomes, right, and equal opportunities. And where you start to blur the lines with elements such as race and gender, age, ethnicity, or protected characteristics, then you're playing in a very dangerous spaces as an organization, because, obviously this is where the lawsuits start to burgeon, and obviously there's a big element in terms of possible reputational damage, right? So there's a key part in terms of ensuring that there are strategies to ensure that the AI applications do ensure that there's fairness and equal opportunity, right? Whether that's around the elimination of bias in the data, using algorithms that are almost fairness aware, so to speak, et cetera, right? I touched on transparency a little bit as well. The way that the AI that an organization is utilizing comes to certain decisions or spits out certain outcomes, that must be transparent. You cannot have a situation where we sort of all know, how it comes to this conclusion. It simply cannot be the case. There needs to be clarity and transparency, not just to HR, but where the decisions are going to affect other individuals, employees, etc. We need to have that clarity, right? So that is where also we can build trust from the employee population, because sometimes people are a little bit wary where technology comes into play, right? Especially when cases like this kind of crop up. So it says that if we want to ensure that there's transparency and everybody understands what's going on, there's a key part around ensuring that we're doing regular assessments, right, of those very algorithms, because things change. There's nothing that's static in the world of work or in the world around us, right? So that just because you implemented the tool kind of 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and nobody's ever done an assessment to check whether everything is still fine, everything is still in order, what's changed, what hasn't changed, that's the kind of element that becomes problematic, and that's where the risk starts to burgeon. Data privacy, data protection, I don't think we need to go into that too much. I think that's self-explanatory, which is really around saying we cannot have a situation where there is no prioritization of protecting sensitive personal data. That's a standard one, right? Whatever it is that it takes, that is what we need to do. And if we don't do it as an organization, it is not going to be an acceptable excuse to just say, oh no, actually it wasn't us really as the organization, it's actually the AI that we're utilizing. That's simply not going to fly, right? And then I think the last point I'd like to touch on is just that accountability and oversight. I spoke about that human oversight, right? This is one of the most critical ways that HR can actually mitigate some of the risks that come up in the AI space, right? There need to be clear lines of accountability where the use of AI applications is concerned, right? And what organizations often don't get right is you can have the tool, people are trained on the tool, people understand, how the tool works, what their role is, etc. But as with all things, really, of this magnitude and things that can have such a big impact on employees, there should be an ethical decision-making framework as well that is established. If there is already that ethical decision-making framework in place, then there should be a supplementary element within that framework that specifically addresses the use of AI. This is critically important, right? Because when the wheels start coming off the bus, then it becomes a bit of a finger-pointing exercise. And when it is that you need to answer tough questions as an organization insofar as what have you done from a governance point of view, an accountability point of view, and you don't even have sort of an ethical decision-making framework, and you really start to come on the back foot, right? The last point I want to make around key risks is if you're using AI in the organization and you don't have a channel through which employees can report concerns, right? Because we talk about things like performance management, learning and development, maybe even reward, et cetera, et cetera. And if we look at the case that we're talking about now, that's more around the recruitment space, etc. But if you don't have a channel where employees can put their hands up and say, but hang on, something's just not right here. Can you guys have a look at this? Or actually, I'm aggrieved. How did you come to this decision? And what I was told is that, it's the technology that kind of came up with the decision. I, as Akona, am not happy, and I would like this to be looked into. Or I have an ethical concern insofar as how the technology was utilized, right? That's critically important. You can't just assume that people are going to know that they must use the kind of stock standard grievance process if they've got concerns in terms of AI and the like. So there are significant risks in this space. And where an organization is not proactive, it's easy to come unstuck. But the overarching theme for me, insofar as risk is concerned, you cannot not have human oversight. Simply cannot be the case, right? So that's my parting comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akona. I think you have made some great, observations and shared some perspective, especially in relation of the over-reliance on AI tools, and so forth, and lacking that human oversight, in relation when we're deploying these tools to say who then comes and audit. Yes, the tool is there, yes, the tool is automated, but we have an oversight who then audits. I think you've also touched on issues related to saying, let there be governance structures in place, to then assess, and also to have those particular platforms to say, if somebody is feeling that there's a discrimination, there's a risk related to using this particular tool, then there's a platform where people can flag, can share, just having that, traditionally having that complaint box, just drop your letter inside, and then we know in terms of, okay, these are the complaints in relation to the tools that we have deployed. Thank you very much, panelist members, for sharing. I think now we'll move us to our section 2, which will be looking at some of the, case applications of AI in relation to recruitment as well as engagement of employees. I think I want to marry the two questions that I have, because I don't want to then ask them because they're very much intertwined, they're very much married. First question is, in what ways is AI transforming the talent acquisition as well as recruitment? And then the second question then speaks to how can AI help organization in terms of identifying and retaining, the top talent, as it were. Any perspectives that we would want to then share?
I think in terms of this topic, I've started to share a bit on the implications of the use of AI in talent acquisition. And in fact, AI is transforming the entire value chain, starting with talent acquisition. We will start to see the most impact in the talent acquisition space quite quickly in the human capital fraternity. In fact, if we had to do a piece on jobs of the future within HR, you will have a very good sense of the jobs that are becoming obsolete and the jobs that will transform over time. And in fact, the recruiter role is shifting fundamentally. So I will say that in the recruitment world, I've highlighted that the entire value chain can be automated, and the strategic role of the recruiter should become a lot more top of mind and prominent for HC leaders. In fact, CHROs of today should be thinking about how to really skill their current organization to meet the demands of the future when the automation tasks are removed from their portfolios. And I think the CHROs that are latching onto that and are thinking about that rapidly will have an advantage. Because larger organizations, as we've learned, are not going to be the ones that have the advantage from a talent perspective any longer. It will be the ones that are more change agile, quick to learn, quick to adapt, quick to learn new thinking, and talent of the future will be attracted to organizations that have that kind of EVP. It's quite interesting if we talk about employee experience. If we think about our own lives as consumers, when Facebook adapts their technology, or when, let's just say, the Checkers 60 app adapts their technology, they're not sending out a notice to all of us to say, newsflash, we've changed this button, we've moved it to a new space, you now need to adopt. No, they expect us to learn in the flow of how we do things. And in fact, we don't question it. We We realize, oh, something's changed on this app. Okay, I need to do it this way, and off we go. In the life of the employee, we can't separate out the consumer mindset and the employee mindset. Employees are expecting the same services that they get in their day-to-day life from human capital and their day-to-day work with the organization. So that employer contract is shifting. There's more demands that employees are placing in an organization, and they know what they need to get. They know about the use of AI. They know about the use of technology, especially with our Gen Zs moving into more leadership type roles. I mean, infiltrating organizations. That digital native approach will be the way we do things. And there's going to be not a teaching element or a learning element, it's an expectation. I know this is how it should be done. So the use of AI is not going to be something that employees will sit around and wait for. They will expect it. And that's the employee experience piece that I'm talking through. When we talk about talent, and you spoke about the talent life cycle, if I need to update my credentials at work, are you linking in with other data sources to pre-populate? Can AI pull the information? I don't have to sit there filling in an entire form for you to have a talent profile. When I need to do a development plan, let's use automation to help me suggest hyper-personalized learning, for example. So the entire value chain is shifting. And my point on employee experience is that if we don't step up and really bring a best in class, you will see your best people leave. They will go to organizations where they're getting that kind of service and they're getting that kind of support from human capital and their employer. So that talent, that war for talent that we used to talk about is becoming super interesting, because with borderless talent, I can be sitting here in Johannesburg and work for an organization in China. That's becoming a reality. So we're no longer competing with Standard Bank and ABSA. We're competing with global organizations for talent. And it's going to become super interesting. In fact, for talent in Africa, where we have unemployment challenges, that poses another layer to this, right? I think the point around retention, you raised this. It's how AI can support the HC or the CHRO, let me say, in presenting cases to their boards or to their executive teams, is there's no longer needs to be a bottom-up review of why are we losing talent. Let's analyze the exit interviews. Let's look at the data. You can also start to make inferences. If you look at, if we use data and AI effectively, predictive models, to say, let's look at sick leave balances, let's look at our listening strategy, let's look at the employee engagement survey. You will already be able to predict that, oh, Luyanda is probably a flight risk. Let's have a stay interview with Luyanda before he takes that decision to exit. So, and predictive modeling has always been there. I'm not saying AI is the reason, it's always been there. In fact, from a data modeling perspective, that's what our data analysts were working toward. But now AI can start to accelerate that, and we can have more hyper-personalization to say, when you have the conversation with Luyanda, looking at the data, Mr. or Ms. Manager, talk about these 5 things, looking at his profile. And so the retention conversation changes. It's not about, let's pull up a state interview guide and run a list of questions. No, it's tailored to you. And I think that's super, super, super exciting. And I think the insights as well to our boards will become more around where are we losing talent, more specific reasons why rather than generalized reasons why. And I think it makes the skills conversation and the skills retention conversation a lot richer. So I hope that gives the audience a good sense of how it's totally transforming the full talent value chain.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanjana. It really does. I think you've also sparked an idea in my mind. We've been talking about this global citizenship thing. and we have been sitting and saying, how are we then getting to that global citizenship? And I think you've reflected very well on that. No, hang on. Actually, AI has put that role now that we're no longer fighting for the local talent, within your space from the first rank with your ABSA, Standard Bank, NetBank, and so forth. But now you're, globally now you can go to Japan, you can go to China, you can go to Singapore, Swedish, in terms of, having to be competitive, with those resources in terms of talent. That is where that is there, in terms of that competition. I think you've touched very well in relation to that, and it has actually sparked that idea to say we're actually there. It's no longer a conversation anymore. It's actually happening. It's just that now probably we may not be seeing it every day, to our day-to-day life, but it's actually happening because we have virtual teams now assisting us in terms of meeting up and so forth. Thank you very much for sharing on that. And specifically also in terms of the board discussions, it will no longer be about this generalized to say, oh, people are just leaving because of money, remunerations, issues, or people are just leaving because they want to grow, and they want to develop themselves. But actually now you could be specific in terms of so and so people within this particular department might be leaving because of these and these and these issues. I think you've touched on that very much, very well, and thank you very much for your submissions on that. Dr. Akona, do you want to share some perspective from your end?
Yeah, I can share some perspective. Look, I think that was very comprehensively covered, and what it did do is get me thinking, and I might be jumping, ahead, Luyanda, so forgive me if I am, but it did also get me thinking insofar as looking at the length and the breadth of what Sanjana's just kind of gone through insofar as all of these variables that are changing, the value that they need to add, the mindset shift that needs to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I link that back to a comment that was made earlier insofar as the reskilling efforts insofar as HR is concerned, because everything is changing, right? If we as HR professionals are not keeping up, well then we're going to have a fundamental problem. This is why I say potentially I'm jumping ahead. It got me reflecting on a conference that I attended where it was really talking around the new paradigm of skills that are required from HR professionals to be able to navigate this space, and not necessarily from kind of compliance and all of those types of things, or the hard kind of technical skills, but really around saying that HR in itself has always been a profession where you can read the book, you can read the textbook, you can pass the exams, but there's almost a different quotient that is required of us as HR people to be able to not just do the job, but to do it well. And the reason why that's always been the case is because we deal with people and not machines, right? So one of the things that I thought was quite interesting when we start to look at the HR professional that is going to be able to leverage AI, right? And other skills to be able to achieve everything that Sanjana just kind of spoke about. What does that person look like, right? What are some of the things that become quite critical? Because as I say, the textbook that was written last year, January, we're thinking about just the topic of AI, part of that is already obsolete now because the rate of change. So it's not really around those kind of hard technical skills per se. That's going to be important because we need to understand the technology that we're using, but it seems that there's a quotient element that comes into play. So we always talk about the intellectual quotient, kind of IQ, that type of thing. Yes, from a cognitive point of view, to be able to logic reasonably, right? To be able to solve problems, that's always going to be important, right? So that's why I say there will always be a level of kind of technical proficiency that is required, right? Because we need to be able to interpret the insights that AI is giving us, right? Without a sort of blind reliance on them, right? To the point that is made insofar as this is going to start to augment even the nature of the discussion, the level of the discussion, and the level of reporting, even at a board level, so that we can start taking different decisions as businesses. But there's also, I think, a part therein which speaks to almost the EQ element, right? And talking more around the kind of the emotional quotient where this is concerned. Because just because AI is here doesn't mean that we lose our empathy and our interpersonal skills as HR, right? So there's an inherent difficulty in managing what you can almost call the human AI interface, if that makes sense, right? And doing so in a manner that's kind of empathetic, right? In resolving challenges that employees have, if your standard response is going to be, oh yeah, but this is what the system said, then there's a problem because you're going to create anxiety within your people. So when we start to think about that future HR person and that future kind of HR role, it doesn't mean that we lose that emotional quotient, those interpersonal skills, that self-awareness, and that ability that we have to be able to lead change insofar as these transitions, right? Because I also think sometimes we forget that just because we sat in the meetings where there was a discussion around why we're taking on this technology, the benefits that we're going to leverage, et cetera, we forget that our 2,000 plus, 5,000 plus employees didn't sit in on those sessions. So the change management element becomes critically important, right? And it becomes even more and more important because of the constant rate of change that we are exposed to. So that human centricity, I think, is going to become even more critical because trust still needs to be maintained. And our people are not necessarily going to trust the tool, they're going to be trusting HR. That HR, notwithstanding the fact that there's an AI interface that's at play, that HR will continue to ensure that the right decisions are taken, right? So that's the part that becomes also important. And then insofar as elements like almost a social quotient, insofar as cultural sensitivity, etc., right? An AI tool, a bot, a piece of technology, etc., is not always, maybe I'm even putting that incorrectly, but the prospects in terms of being in tune, and I'm talking about the here and now, in tune insofar as certain sensitivities, be it from a cultural perspective, etc., right? That's a level of fine tuning and it's a level that I don't think we're there yet. So we need to then, as HR, be able to be that buffer, right? Hence, that human oversight is going to continue to be important, right? To really expect that, the tool is going to do absolutely everything from an influencing point of view, from a collaboration point of view, looking at those nuances, because at the end of the day, we're still dealing with people, right? That's not going to be possible. So it's around saying that we can't lose sight of developing kind of our social quotient. And I think the last one is then around saying that if we accept the fact that there's going to be a level of agility that's required from us as HR because of the constant churn and change and the new dispensation that we've been moving into, right? It means that there's a level of adaptability that we need to develop as HR professionals, right? So that we are responsive, so that we are agile, so that we are flexible, so that we continuously reinvent ourselves as HR professionals in line with the direction that the organization is taking, along with the direction that HR is kind of going. So, and I think in summary, I think the gauntlet is thrown down to kind of HR professionals. It's an incredibly difficult space to navigate, right? And then getting that balance right insofar as technical versus soft skills, you don't need one or the other. You're going to need both, right, to be able to achieve that level of success. So, as I said, Leander, my apologies. I almost jumped forward because this is really what stuck out in my mind when I was listening to the comments, that were made insofar as the length and the breadth and the depth insofar as what's possible with AI and HR.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akon. And truly, you have jumped the gun. I think our next session was going to, truly zone in into that. But then I will ask, Ms. Sanjana to also share her perspective, in relation to that, because already I think from your perspective, I've already addressed, some of the issues related to the future work, how the augmented HR professional would look like, and some of the skills that are then needed. I think you've touched in relation to that social quotient, that we will need that balance in terms of the human factor element, social quotients and so forth, being self-aware and so forth, and in relation to now the technical skills. We still need those metacognitive skills that will then be needed in relation to now the technical skills that will then be needed. I think you've touched very well on that. In terms of that human oversight, will always be needed. The trust element, the emotional intelligence element, as part of the skills that will then be shaped, in terms of now how the future of the HR professional would look like and so forth. Thank you very much, Dr. Akono, and that I think maybe I'll allow Ms. Sanjana to also, tap into and share her own perspective, on this section, that we are moving towards, which is our last section, which looks at the future of work and some of the HR capabilities. And I really want to ask a question related to it. What does the augmented HR professional would look like in your views, and marry it with my second question in terms of, which are the new skills, mindsets that the HR professional must have, or the HR professional must develop in order to remain relevant in this new day age of AI.
I think the response from Dr. Okona was spot on. Sure, we'll always need technical skills, but the differentiator is going to be what we term the softer skills. They're not actually soft skills. They are actually the hard skills that's going to allow us to differentiate ourselves as HC professionals. And I think if you think about the HC professional of the past, how did they demonstrate value and earn their place at the table? It was through their technical ability predominantly. I led talent for 20 years, hence I'm qualified to be an expert in the space. Or I was the head of reward, or I grew up as a reward professional, and hence I got to the stage. Forget that logic of career development. It's no longer going to be about specialist skills. It's going to be about, if we had to take the T-shaped skills, even what we term technical is going to be broken up, not in the silos we think from a practice perspective, but more around the future of human capital. But let me start with the behavioral elements. The change agility, the growth mindset, the openness to adaptation, the ability to unlearn, the ability to be resilient, the ability to have grit and demonstrate tenacity. Now, I'm going through a few of these, but Dr. Kona touched on it. It's not just about a specific group of HR, it's across the board. HC professionals that demonstrate those kinds of behaviors will be a lot more successful. And so it's not about the book smarts of the past or having had that psychology qualification or the HR qualification from university. It's not about that any longer. And so the social quotient, the emotional intelligence, the ability to use judgment will become extremely important, because those are the elements that AI cannot tap into from a human perspective. And individuals that are a lot more advanced in those skills are going to shine when we think about talent for the future in human capital. Another thing I will touch on is think about the operating model of the future when it comes to human capital. It's not going to be about there's a talent function, a reward function, a learning function. No, there will be a pool of individuals based on skills that people will pick from to say, let's solve this problem. So if we have to solve, let's just say, employee experience strategy for the organization, we will go to a group of consultants and say, Luyanda has this skill that will serve this project. Sanjana has this skill that will serve this project. We contract you for a sprint of 90 days to solve the project. And then you go back into the consultant problem solver pool. So what does that mean? Coming back to my earlier point of growing up in the stream of specialization won't necessarily differentiate you. You need to have a variety of experience so that when your skill becomes your differentiator to say, I'm actually multi-skilled. I can get involved in multiple layers of work. And I think that's where we're moving to as an HC organization of the future. Also, the CHRO of the future, that role is fundamentally shifting. That business partner, the generalist stream, is again no longer about being the transactors and the administrators and the people that schedule interviews and accompany their business partners or their business leaders to these discussions. Business acumen, commercial acumen, being a business leader first. And second, the secondary component is human capital. So bringing the people lens into the business discussion will become extremely important for HC generalists of the future. And I think that ask is quickly shifting. In fact, it's becoming an elevated expectation now. And with the advent of AI, it's going to just accelerate. So that business partnering landscape is fundamentally changing, which is really exciting for us who are keen to see HR move from that traditional model into a model that serves business well. And I think that's awesome to be here at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanjana. Truly appreciate it. I think you've touched very much well on terms of those social questions. And you've touched about issues of being multidisciplinary, having more than one specific, no longer being kept in one box, that you are a specialist in this, but now more tools related to project management to say, look, there's the sprint, just jump in, you work on it, you move on. You go back to your functional area, but you need that, multidisciplinary in terms of the skill set that you can then do and not keep yourself in that particular one box. And with that being said, I think I will just allow for one or two questions to then just come in, and then we can just do our final thoughts and then wrap it up. But I'm not seeing any questions on the chat, and I'm not sure if our participants are able to then raise their hands up. Oh, okay, I see that there is a hand up. Is it Tamisha? Yes, Tamisha, you can go ahead. Are you able to unmute? Okay, I think we can't hear Tamisha. Maybe internet issues or issues of not being able to then unmute. If there's any other questions from the floor, from our participants, please, you can go ahead, or you can put it on the chat, and then we could be able to then address it. We'll ask our esteemed guest members to then address some of those questions. But with that then being said, I think one of the things that I've seen from Regenesis that I think we might be moving forward to that, not selling in terms of Regenesis, but I've seen that we have that personal mastery module, which then speaks to those social quotients, that are elevated to what we'll be seeing as part of the new future work, the new future Luyanda, the new future employee that will then be hired, which speaks to your spiritual intelligences, which speaks to your emotional intelligences, and those social quotients and that metacognitive, social skills, and thank you very much, our esteemed panelist members, for then sharing on that. I think probably we may have some technicality in terms of having people to then unmute, and I'm not seeing any of the chats in terms of questions. And then we are obviously, in terms of our time, we are at 19:30 on my clock. I will just allow 1 minute for each so that we just go about for 2 minutes and not more. Just closing remarks. Mr. Jana, you're already here. I'll allow you to have your closing remarks. I still want to say doctor. It's still rounding in my mind. I think you should do that PhD.
I think it's a course.
Yes, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Luanda. Definitely enjoyed the conversation and the engagement on this topic. I think, closing remarks are that there's two levels that we need to think about as HC professionals. The internal, in terms of how are we showing up to embrace AI. So if I could leave anything with the audience today is, yes, we want to solve for our organizations and solve for the partnerships that we may have. But think about your own life from a personal perspective. What do you need to do in order to shift your thinking? What do you need to do to unlearn so that you set yourself up well to thrive in the age of AI? And that may be different for different people on the call, and that's fine. But I think as long as you are reflecting and you're thinking about a strategy, you're already a little bit ahead. Because some people will let change happen to them. Others prepare for change. When they see a wave coming, they will already anticipate. And so they are ahead of the curve. My ask is you stay ahead of the curve. Know what it is you need to learn. Learn about new technology. Read the latest articles. Be receptive to change, because I can say this without a shadow of doubt. AI is not going away. To the naysayers who think this was a fad and it's disappearing, no, it's not. It's here to stay, and it's going to just accelerate. So that's on a personal level is my closing point. And on the second point, which is around how we show up as HC professionals, it really is about looking at the full scope of HC, the full value chain, really being keen to understand how HR is disrupting each of these areas. And some of you may play in different spaces. You may play in ER, or you may play in talent. That's fine. But I think have a strong understanding of the entire value chain and the impact of AI. And again, like I said, stay abreast of the latest research so that you can be good HC influencers to your partners. Thank you, Luanda.
Thank you very much. Dr. Akona?
Sure. Thanks for that, Leander. Look, I'll be very brief. I think the key points have been covered off, and I think my closing remarks are that indeed AI is here to stay, right? And the mark of the businesses or the organizations that are going to succeed is who leverages the AI best, right? And if our intention as HR professionals is still to have that seat at the table and to become those strategic partners, then we cannot afford to be almost left behind, right? Because we are the ones that need to bring the HR part to the table when we're sitting at kind of board level, sitting in strategic meetings, etc. And I think just from what we've seen thus far, in understanding that there's still a long way to go, I think there's so much more that we're going to see from an AI point of view, but we can already see that leveraging AI in the right way actually can assist organizations and HR functions from a compliance point of view, productivity point of view, adaptability point of view, and just general peace within the workplace, right? So there's an element that says businesses can then ensure that they increase the understanding insofar as what this AI is, not just from an HR perspective, but from a broader employee perspective. The danger that we run as HR is for the technology to be an HR thing. It's not an HR thing, right? And to prevent those kind of silos and those demarcations from happening. And it's just, and we know what happens when things are labeled HR things, right? People don't buy in, they don't engage with it the way that they should, etc. So it's really around saying, we're going on the journey as HR. But if we're going to leave everybody else behind as we move on that journey, we must expect that we're going to come unstuck in future, because we are not going to have champions that are by our side, that are sitting in other respective areas of the business, that are then going to be able to collaborate with us to actually drive this agenda forward, right? And at the end of the day, all we all want in our respective functions, including HR, is for us to be able to build organizations that are going to have longevity and sustained success. So that's my parting comment.
Thank you very much, Fatako. Thank you very much to our guest members. We truly appreciate some of your insights that you've shared with us. I'm seeing some of the comments that are now starting to come in. At some point, I was like, where are the people? I think it was a learning curve for them. I think I resonate with some of the comments that were then made today. It was a very informative session. We've learned about new things, case studies that we didn't know about, that we can then go and extend on, in relation to AI, the usage, the capability, and so forth. And some of the issues related to the new skills that we need, which is the skills that have been there, and we are calling it soft skills. But now it seems as if those soft skills are the ones that will make us to be competitive now in the market, moving away from the technical skills that it's there, because everyone can attain the technical skills, as it were. But now those soft skills that we used to call them. So now we need to reflect and go back in terms of ensuring, and nobody teaches you that in terms of a university setup and so forth. Those grow within us as people, how we then converse with people, engage with people, and so forth. But thank you very much, our esteemed panelists members. Thank you very much to our participants as well for listening in. We know that we have went over with 7 minutes in terms of your time. It happens like this when people are enjoying. It's hard for us to then leave the room all the time. But thank you very much. With the powers then vested in me, I will then ask this meeting for it to be adjourned. Until next time, colleagues, until on our future then engagements once more. Thank you very much to our panelist members for sharing. We truly appreciate it. Bye-bye, colleagues. Please enjoy your evenings.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, everyone. Cheers.